Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Exploring State Culture, Leveraging Trust for Change in Police Culture. Today, we have our two Blue Courage Master Trainers, Michael Nila and Jack Hart, and our cultural anthropologists, Ken Price and Robert Adams. Also joining us today is San Francisco Police Chief, William Scott. Thank you so much for being here. I will now turn it over to Jack to get started.
Hey, Becky, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone on the Blue Courage and the Thomas Leland teams for getting this going. And welcome back to all of you. I think this is our 8th webinar so far in this series. And to have you consistently showing up once and twice a week is really fantastic as we take this issue of building trust and building culture and being the architects of our own culture here in policing, both as we experience policing and as we try and lead it. I think it's really exciting and it's been a really great time. So thanks again, Becky. And thanks again to all the panelists for joining us. This webinar series is about the exploration of Blue culture. It's not to give a prescription and answers, but really to ask the questions that give voice to experiences inside and outside of policing, as it is run, practiced, and experienced. Hopefully, we can boil that down to a blueprint to understand culture, the dynamics, and the levers needed to exercise if you want a healthy culture. Through this exploration, we hope that we have empowered and will continue to empower police organizations, its members, and the community to be these architects of a healthy culture. Today, we continue our series of questions with a police executive who went from Alabama to Los Angeles to San Francisco in his personal and professional journey. We will explore his lived experience from ground zero of the racial justice movement and college donned in crimson red, then into a lifetime of wearing dark blue, and how that journey informed him and how it can inform us in our lenses in which we experience, observe, and shape police culture. First, a couple quick introductions. In his 50th year in policing, Police Commander Emeritus from Aurora, Illinois, and founder of Blue Courage, please welcome Michael Nila. An applied cultural anthropologist and senior engagement leader, consultant, and managing partner with Thomas Leland, please welcome Dr. Ken Price. A cultural anthropologist who specializes in diversity and inclusion, mindful leadership, organizational change, and strategic planning. Please welcome Dr. Robert Adams Jr. And in his over 30 years in policing, he grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, go Tide, and attended this University of Alabama, earning a degree in accounting. He rose through the ranks with over 27 years in the Los Angeles Police Department and has been chief of the San Francisco Police Department for over 3.5 years. His star number is 26 to honor his wife, with whom he has 3 children. Please welcome Chief William Scott. Hello, Chief. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Hi, Jack, and hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the nice introduction.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, I want to admit to you, Chief, that I'm not in-house today. We're actually on assignment. Michael and I are at the Chicago Police Academy, and I wanted to give a shout out to this. If you ask me why I come to the Chicago Police Academy to help train, it's because of this. This is a police dog that's in the very vestibule of the very entrance. And as you now recognize, Chief, you see the Golden Gate Bridge, very front and center. And this monument honors an officer named Thor Soderberg, one of the great leaders in the Chicago Police Department, while not through formal rank, through his way of being a coach and a mentor and a humanitarian and someone who really brought life and passion to policing. And it's during this month that he was murdered 10 years ago. And so we honor him and honor the Chicago Police Department and Chicago government for recognizing that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he helped someone, a blind person, do the escape from Alcatraz swim. So love that we can go to all of these places, Chief, and be able to bring the San Francisco message and spirit along with us wherever we go. We do influence people in a good way.
We do. That's great. Thank you, Jack, for sharing that.
Thanks so much, and thank you for being here. And I know you met Robert earlier in the week, one of our great cultural anthropologists, and Robert wanted to start with a question.
Yes, welcome, Chief.
Hi, Robert.
You're from Birmingham, Alabama, a place that's known for its long tradition of activism in the civil rights movement and on the forefront of change. And I wondered how growing up in Alabama and Birmingham shaped your life and shaped where you are today.
Well, my childhood, actually, I was from the age of 5 which was on the heels of the civil rights movement, which was really the epicenter was in Birmingham, Alabama. You know, Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which has become so famous. A lot of the marches and the social interaction and the social activism. And these were things that, you know, I was too young to understand, but my family, my parent, my mom, who was in the midst of all that and participated in many of those movements, would share their experiences with me as I grew up. And some of that, it shaped who I am. I mean, they tell me I was out there in the midst of some of that in my stroller when I was a baby, but I don't remember any of that. But what I do remember, when we moved back to Alabama after my father was tragically killed in a car accident, we moved back there. I was 6 years old. I was 6 years old. And it was on the heels of that movement. And Birmingham was still a very segregated city at the time, very segregated. And so I was in a military environment where I've been around a lot of different people, because the military is diverse. And, you know, going to a military preschool, and, you know, my first kindergarten experience was the military, where they were, you know, a mixture of people. And I go back to the South, where even though the laws did not mandate segregation in 1970 when we moved back, the culture there was still very segregated. So it was, even at that young age, it was a change for me. And I do remember, you know, going from a situation where I was around a lot of different people to only being around African-American people. And I didn't understand it, but I recognized that. And so those type of experiences, you know, you live with them, you grow. And as I got older and started to have the wisdom to understand what all that meant, then I started to piece it together, you know, going to segregated schools and seeing some, you know, disparities as I got older, and educational opportunities and the like. And you start to recognize, really as an adult, what the consequences of those things are, and how devastating they can be. So you know, I wouldn't trade my upbringing for anything in the world. When I was a kid, I used to watch California on television, and the sunshine and the fog in San Francisco. I liked football from a very young age, and I used to say, man, one day I want to live in California. But I think those experiences, living in that type of environment, helped to shape me and shape my thinking to how I am. I'm very socially, I think, you know, self-evaluation here, but I think I'm very socially aware. I think I recognize that I wouldn't be sitting in this seat as chief of police if it weren't for those struggles in Birmingham, Alabama, where people sacrificed everything so that people like me and others can have an opportunity. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Their lives. People were killed to fight for equal rights and equal justice. And, you know, that hits home to me. That hits home because, you know, we knew some of those people. My wife's family, we knew some of those people. So it's really important. As we see what's happening today with the calls for change, particularly in our world, the policing world, it takes us back to the mid-'60s and the struggles and the you know, calls for change. And we're seeing it in a different form now, but we're seeing it. And that part is exciting, because what I believe, based on what happened then, is change is going to come, and some of it's going to come pretty quickly. And because of this movement and this call for change. So yeah, that's what my upbringing, I think, prepared me to be very open to what's happening. Not resistant, not disgusted by it, but open and optimistic about what's to come from this.
And I know making that transition from segregated schools in Birmingham to the University of Alabama also kind of taught you some resilience and things like that. Can you reflect a little bit on that?
Sure. And you know, as I said, that the schools were segregated, and I didn't realize it when I was in, you know, elementary school and high school. Didn't realize it. Look, I share a story with you from elementary school, and then I'll take it to college. Elementary school, I think I was in the 7th grade. The whole entire city system, they started achievement testing, and it was the first time it had been done in that school district. And here's the reality: the schools in the Black part of town, by and large, a very small percentage of the students passed those tests. And this was basically grade level achievement. These were things that we were supposed to have been taught, and we weren't. My school, no exception. very few of us, including me, passed that first achievement test. It was really sad. Even as a, what it was like 12 years old at the time, I knew there was a problem. I wasn't a dumb kid. I knew, my teachers all told me I was a smart kid, as a matter of fact. None of us passed that test. None of us. And so what the school district did is they basically had this intensive, we got to catch these kids up type of program. And they gave us what we needed. So some months later, we all took the test. And guess what? The majority of us passed it. The moral to the story is we didn't have the opportunity to even have a chance of passing it because we weren't taught the things that we needed to pass the test. So fast forward to when I got to the University of Alabama, I was always a good student through high school, honor student, National Honor Society, all that. I go to college and I struggled, and I'm sitting next to students to my left, to my right, who had advanced placement courses, and they had been prepared to go to college. They had opportunities to have courses that I never even had an opportunity to take because they weren't offered at my high school. So that's when I really, the 12-year-old experience is one thing, but when I got to college and then you see how you really compare to the person sitting next to you who has had opportunities to be exposed to the things they needed to be exposed to be successful, that's when it started to really happen for me. Like, okay, I see how disadvantaged that I really was, but I never looked at it like I was a victim. It made me work harder. It made college a lot harder probably than it was for some people. But, I prevailed and learned how to be resilient. And that's from my upbringing. Again, living in a world where these things are kind of common, you learn to work through them and around them. And I think that resilience carries me forward to this day. I don't dwell on problems. I play the hand that I'm dealt, sometimes to a fault. But that's because of my upbringing. You were taught you might not get everything that everybody else gets, but let's make the best of what you have. And that's how my mother kind of raised her family. And today that sticks with me, sometimes to a fault, because I don't complain a lot about what I don't have. It's about, let me make the best of what I do have. I think that part is a good part, but sometimes you do have to speak up and demand to have an equal seat at the table, and equal justice and equal opportunity and all that. And when you're taught to just, hey, play the hand you're dealt, keep your head down and keep working, sometimes that other part about demanding doesn't come so natural to you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I know. Go ahead.
Chief, we have a great question from one of our attendees, but I think maybe we can hold it for a little bit later. But for now, you are well known for promoting the idea of building trust as a very important, essential lever for organizational change. And during your 27-year career at LAPD, you worked for some very notable and maybe even at some levels controversial police chiefs. I mean, from Daryl Gates, who was the cop's cop, to Willie Williams, who was building bridges to the community, and then Bernie Parks, who was about integrity and rules and accountability, and then Chief Bratton, who you described as kind of pulling all of those pieces together. Can you discuss how your career taught you the importance of the value of trust, especially when there are conflicts between values-based and rules-based cultures?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. I love sharing this experience because my 27 years with the Los Angeles Police Department, I had the pleasure to work under 5 police chiefs. And, my first chief, I have his, my academy picture on my nightstand of me and Daryl Gates shaking hands. And I value and treasure that picture. Daryl Gates was a cop's chief. He supported his officers almost to a fault. And he was very well revered within the department. That's the chief that swore me in when I raised my hand to take the oath of the office of a police officer, and I will value and treasure that. And I had an opportunity to at least, meet him a couple times before he retired. But Chief Gates, he stood by his police officers. Now, he did hold people accountable when they messed up, and that wasn't the issue with Chief Gates. But sometimes he would stand by his officers to the dismay and the disgust of the community at times when the officers, I'm not saying that he ever should have thrown, his officers or us to the wolves, but what I'm saying at times, the community has a point. There's a point where the community says, hey, this officer needs to be dealt with. And, when you're defined and when you stand behind him, it causes friction in the community, which is, fast forward, 2.5 years into my career when the Los Angeles riots happened, Chief Gates hadn't, in my opinion, he those things where he didn't connect with the community really came back to haunt the department and the city of Los Angeles because the trust was not there. And when that city erupted in flames on April 29th, 1992, I was out there in the midst of all that, and it was like an apocalyptic movie. I mean, it was I've never seen it before or since, the way it was for that, next 5 days in Los Angeles. And, Chief Gates, as much as he was revered, I think with his leadership style, toward the end of his career, he became really not embraced by the very community that we were there to serve. And I'm not saying everybody in the community, because a lot of people love Chief Gates, but a large portion of the community, particularly the portion of the community that was disenfranchised and that was saying the loudest, we need things to change in our community. So I learned a lot from that. And, I learned a lot from, even as a young officer, just standing back and watching kind of what was going on at the top of the LAPD at that time. I learned a lot from that. So when Chief Gates retired and he was forced out, we brought in Willie Williams, who had been the commissioner of Philadelphia PD. Chief Williams was a community chief. He came in, he was an outsider from the East Coast. He had some issues with that because we hadn't had an LAPD outside chief for quite a long time. At this time, this is 1993 or 4, 93, I believe, 94. And when Chief Williams came in, he started to work right away at building back the trust in the community. And in my opinion, he did a brilliant job. Willie Williams wrote a book that it wasn't on our reading list when I was started to study for my first promotional exam, but I went to the library at the time. That was the thing to do. We didn't have the internet. We didn't, we couldn't get a book on Amazon. I went to the library and I checked out that book, and it was all about community policing. And that book really kind of set in my mind what working with the community and building trust was all about. Willie Williams brought the Community Police Advisory Board to the LAPD. But in terms of, his leadership style and all, he did have balance. He did reach out to the police officers, but his calling card and what I learned most from him about leadership from a chief's position is the importance of building that trust in the community. And he had a tall order when he came to LA because things were bad. You fast forward to now, what's going on, with the Minneapolis incident where the whole world's looking at Minneapolis. That was LAPD in 1992, where basically the policing world, we felt, were mad at us because we had allowed Rodney King to occur, which led to riots not only in LA, but across the country. So all eyes were on us. And the community, building that community trust was priority number one when Willie Williams came into town. And I think he did a really good job at that. He repaired the relationship between LAPD and the community, particularly the African-American community. So my next chief was Bernard Parks. And Bernard Parks came into leadership in LAPD, very well respected, brilliant man. And I still have a relationship with Bernard Parks to this day. I didn't have that relationship when I was a young police officer because you couldn't really get to the chief in that way, But I looked like all chiefs at that point in my career. I looked from afar, and Bernard Parks was a strict disciplinarian at a time where our department needed that. And he probably fired more people than the last 2-3 chiefs combined. But his thing was, this is what you learned about Chief Parks. If you didn't have integrity, you were not going to be a member of the department while he was the chief. If you didn't treat people the right way, you were not going to be an LAPD officer. And not to say that we didn't still have problems, but if you lied, you will get fired. And that became crystal clear. And what that did is it changed the culture of the organization. You know, people talk oftentimes about the code of silence in policing, the thin blue line, and you know, these things. It's us against them, and we got to stick together. Well, with Bernard Parks, if you chose to lie for your partner in the name of sticking together, you probably were going to be out of policing. And that's kind of, we learned that really, really quickly with him. So from him, what I learned is a police department has to have discipline, because in order to gain trust, and this is where accountability is so important, even right now to this day, when the public doesn't feel that the police department has the ability to police itself and hold its officers accountable when they need to be held accountable, the public loses trust and you can't do your jobs effectively. And not only that, then you lose control of the ability to do that, because the public is going to do it for you. And so with that chief, he changed the landscape. Not to say that previous chiefs didn't hold officers accountable, but not in the way Bernard Parks did. He overhauled the entire discipline system. He made it user-friendly for people to voice their concerns and file complaints. LAPD used to have a policy, and this was right when I became a supervisor, when Chief Parks was in office in that chair. They used to have a policy where if you came in to make a complaint, it was unless it was something really, really egregious, it was kind of up to the supervisor whether that complaint would be taken. In other words, a sergeant could dispo a complaint on the spot and say, well, this person's not credible, and and that complaint wouldn't go anywhere. Well, he overhauled that discipline system where when a person came in to make a complaint, it was mandatory. I don't care what they say. They can say, you know, the man from Mars helped the LAPD, you know, rob my house. The complaint was going to be documented. It was going to be forwarded to an internal affair for investigation, and the allegations would be investigated for their work. That was a cultural shift in our department, and it didn't go over well. I can tell you, I was, you know, a rank and file member, and it didn't go over well. But after I, you know, got a little wisdom and was in supervision, I began to see how important that trust was. My next chief, Bill Bratton, brilliant guy. He was very balanced. He understood the need for building trust in the community. He understood the nurturing of police officers. You know, he came from NYPD. He had actually done some consulting work for RAND, I believe it was RAND, and he really understood the department as a consultant, because one of his consultant jobs was helping the LAPD. And this was during our tough time where we were going just about to enter into a federal consent decree because of the Rampart scandal and other things. So Braden understood all that. So he came in and he was very balanced. And Chief Braden, very insightful man. By the time, I think I had just gotten promoted to lieutenant when he was coming on board. And I had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times, but I didn't really get to sit down with him and hear how he thought until I became a lieutenant in internal affairs, and I would have to present cases to him. And he would do his thing and decide on, you know, discipline or not discipline, but he would always give insight as to why. And what he talked about a lot was, what's the right thing to do? What's the right thing to do for the organization? What's the right thing to do for the employee? What's the right thing to do for the public? Because when you're in that position, you have to take all three into consideration. And there's this balance that I learned from him. You know, not compromising to the point where you're going to sell one out for the other, but compromise to the point that you take it all in and you try to make a balanced decision. Because as the chief, you have to represent the best interests of the organization first and foremost. And the employees do the work, they're a big part of that, but no one individual, what I learned from Braden, should trump the needs of protecting the organization from harm. And so that balance, he was just brilliant at that. And so he was a very dynamic leader. And, you know, he brought a lot in terms of my insight, because I actually got to sit in front of him and hear how he thought, which was really important to my development. And then my final chief before I left the LAPD was Charlie Beck. Charlie Beck was just organically just click with the community. Charlie Beck did a lot of his career, his operational career in South LA. the most challenging part of LA by far. The most homicides, the most gang crime, the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. And so Charlie Beck understood, he was in touch with that as South LA goes, so goes LAPD. And he was very attentive to that population. That's where the majority of the African-American population is in LA, or was at that time. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of the need was in terms of reducing violence and gun violence and gang violence and all that. He was very in tune with that. And he basically, what I learned from Charlie Beck is he also had very good balance. But where Bratton just had the bigger picture, Beck knew that some areas need extra attention. Just like some parts of your police department need extra attention. Some areas of San Francisco, they need extra attention. He was a master at really dissecting that and then putting the right, he used to use this term dosage, giving the right dosage of medicine to the right parts of the city of LA. And I watched him, Bratton promoted me to captain, Beck promoted me to commander and deputy chief. Parks promoted me to sergeant. And so each step of the way, I took something from these chiefs about leadership, and particularly in terms of the culture of the organization and the culture of how we relate to the communities that we serve. And those lessons kind of made me who I am today. And I learned something from all of them. They all had their strengths and they all had their weaknesses, but they all were good leaders, good men, I think. And I took a little piece of all of them when I came to San Francisco. I still keep in touch with Bernard Parks to this day. I still keep in touch with Charlie Beck. When he went to Chicago as the interim, we talk quite often. And, he shares stuff with me, I share stuff with him. And Bernard Parks, if I want to have a conversation about discipline and what the right thing to do, I'm going to call Bernard Parks, because later in life, after he had retired from the LAPD, that's when I really got to know Bernard Parks. And I started asking questions about what I would hear when I was coming up, about him being a disciplinarian and he's unfair and all these things. And people feared, his discipline. And I started asking him questions about, well, tell me why you did this thing. And by this point, I'm a commander at the time. And it all made sense. It all made sense as to why he did what he did by the time I got to that level of the organization and saw really how important a discipline department is and how important a fair discipline system is. I don't think Chief Parks probably communicated that as well as he could have. And that's what I learned from him later in life when we talked. The officers and the cops really got to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Some of them might not like it, but at least they understand. But again,
Chief,
it was a great question. Yeah,
I love it. I love the explanation because you talk about the ideal and the real of how it was experienced. So I like the philosophy discussion and then the strengths and weaknesses in the application of it, because with both of our cultural anthropologists on the line, that's where the pain exists in culture, is that gap between the ideal and the real. So I like that, being able to explain that, and so we can make sense of our experience still in the profession and in the community who experiences it. So very interesting insights. Thank you, Chief. Ken, I know you have a question as well.
Thanks so much for joining us, Chief Scott. I'm pleased that we got this time with you. And I'm looking at the questions that we have from our participants. We've got two really deep questions, and I hope we're going to make sure we have enough time to cover those. So I'm going to maybe provide a lead-in question to one of the questions that Catherine Winters has put here. It's very much tied to what I was going to ask you, basically. And so my question is, you have had deep influences by, certainly the chiefs and then everybody else you've worked with in these departments and communities. And you commented earlier on the sort of distinction of people who are insiders taking on positions of power, people who are outsiders taking on positions of power. Can you say, because you're currently bringing your outside experience, in a sense, into San Francisco, can you describe a little bit about, what do you see as most critical to make that work effectively, both with the department and internally and also with the community?
Well, coming in, from the outside, building trust is really important. And for me to build trust and have people to have faith and trust in me. And it's not an easy thing, and I saw it with Chief Williams. I saw it with Chief Bratton. I think Chief Bratton, because Chief Bratton's, he had gone to different departments. He was in Boston, and then he went to New York Transit, and then he went to NYPD, then LAPD, and then back to New York. So he had kind of mastered being the outsider coming in. For people like me who, my whole career was LAPD, it was a little bit more of a challenge, I think, because I had to learn everything. Really, it's kind of, the basics of policing, I think, are the same from city to city, but the culture of the city is different. The culture of the organization is different. Even simple things that you would think, like the radio codes and the terminology, it was like, some of it was like a foreign language to me when I came to San Francisco. Everything that they knew, when I'm hearing, and in the police world, we talk in acronyms. So people are, shooting out acronyms, and I was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. So that was a cultural shift that I didn't really anticipate how difficult that would be. And when you're coming in at the top of the organization, when you're used to being in a position where you understand the organization from top to bottom because you've lived it, it's much more difficult. And so I can't go to a San Francisco police, recruit just out of the academy and really say that I can share your experiences of what it is to be in that seat as a San Francisco police officer. I can talk about what it is in general and my experiences in LAPD, but I can't share those experiences. So as a leader, you really have to, and that's a big part of the game. When I was in Los Angeles, there was really not a whole lot of people that I couldn't say, I understand what you're going through because I sat in your exact seat. I can say that here, and the fact that I've been through riots before, I've been through turmoil before, I've been through scandal before, definitely had my share of white knuckle experiences in LA, because LA is that type of city. It's just, you get exposed to a lot. But I can't say that I know what it is to be a cop on the streets, a working cop on the streets of San Francisco. And I didn't realize, how much that would mean to me until I was in that seat. And it's like, the things that I was able to do when I walked into a lineup in LAPD, like, you're not going to be able to tell me much that I haven't experienced because I've sat in your seat. That part kind of is taken away from you. So you have to go to other things, and really it's, the philosophies, and we speak the same language, and I can relate to what you're doing because I hadn't done it in this uniform, but I've done it in other uniforms. So building that trust becomes a little bit more difficult. Mm-hmm. And with the community, you're starting from scratch. In my situation, no allies, you don't know the political folks, you don't know really who the community players are. So everything for the first year or so is kind of, it's trial and error. And you're doing this while you're trying to build trust. Like for me and many chiefs, you step into a situation, many of us, where the expectations are astronomical, and the expectations to make things happen right away are astronomical. But you have to learn the department first. You have to learn your city first. And that's, I say can be a disadvantage from an outside chief. The advantages are many also. You come in with a fresh set of eyes. You come in and you're asking questions. Why do we do it this way? And many people can't even remember why we do it this way because we've been doing it this way for so long, it just hasn't been challenged. That is this still the best way to do this particular task or this particular job? So you come in with this turning over every stone, and the pitfall in that is you can't change everything right away. And some things you don't need to change. And what I learned really quickly in San Francisco is tradition means something. And there's good traditions and there's bad traditions. The good traditions mean something in San Francisco. And I saw that like by day 2. And I wanted to make sure that I honored those strong traditions. That I didn't come in and say, we're going to change the uniform just because I don't like it. We're going to change the way the cars, and I think previous chiefs did this. I don't like these cars. Let's paint them light blue. I was really careful to honor the traditions, and I still do, because I think this department has some great traditions. And that means a lot to a lot of people, not only the people on the job, but the retirees, the people who have served in this city, the people who, you know, respect this department. So you really have to respect the good traditions. Now, on the other side, there's some traditions that need to go away. You know, there's some cultures in every police department that, okay, it's time to stop doing that. And you know, when you talk about changing culture, you have to be very strategic. You have to be very methodical about how to accomplish that, because you can't do everything at once. And you got to understand that cops, for the most part, don't like change because it's uncomfortable. Most people don't. And if you do that while you're trying to build trust, you got to work twice as hard, because you're taking away something that, whether it's good or bad, the people value. It's valuable to them. And it makes it that much more difficult to build trust. And it's not about building trust by being liked. I mean, I think most people, would like people to think of them favorably. But as a chief of police, if that's your objective, you're probably not going to be very successful, because as you all know, you have to make some very difficult and tough decisions in the job. And it starts day one. And if your game is about being liked rather than being respected and being thought as honorable and a man or woman of integrity, if your game is being liked and making sure that you make decisions that are popular, you might last a little while on that, but you're probably going to implode. And I knew that going in, because I think the people that I had worked under as chiefs, none of them were those people. They didn't really care, in my opinion, about being liked, but they all were very well respected.
Yeah, that's, and that I think does kind of lead us to this other question, because tying together what you just described around the sort of values piece, obviously you need a balance between the rules-based and the values-based in a department in order to get it right. And it's got to mix well with the community, which is always going to be a different community. So I can imagine that, there's a lot of challenges. And then if you're coming in from outside, you got to learn all of it. But the expectation, I suppose, is that you bring that fresh perspective that you were talking about that is going to be most critical to actually get the change that's needed. I'd just like to, this question here from Catherine Winters, that says, both Chief Scott and Chief Acevedo have spoken on the need to hold officers to a high standard as an essential component of building community trust. How do we then move from establishing trust to building relationships with our communities? And in doing so, instill a culture in our departments where frontline officers understand and embrace community trust as an essential component of effective policing. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. That's a great question from Catherine, and it's a tall order. So it is a tall order, because, building trust and building relationships, in my humble opinion, they go hand in hand. And again, going back to the people that I learned from, Charlie Beck was all about building relationships. That's what he did in South LA. He built relationships, and it's a lot of work, but it has to happen. And how do we do that? The first thing is you have to, I think, as a police organization, as a police chief, you have to make people honestly believe, because hopefully it's in your heart to do this, that they matter. Not only that they matter, their lives matter, but their voices matter. That you're not going to put them in a category where they're marginalized. And for a lot of people in some of the hardest hit communities and the hardest hit groups in our society, San Francisco is no exception to this. They haven't felt like they really matter. They haven't felt like they really had a voice. And so as a chief of police, and I did this in LA particularly at a captain level and up, I always gave people access to me. And even it doesn't really matter what your status in the community. If somebody wants to make an appointment, I would tell whoever was scheduling my appointments, I would ask, what they wanted to talk about, but I gave people access, and I still do that to this day. And it makes the job a lot harder, because it eats up your time. Some might say, and I've been told this, I was told this at LAPD, I've been told this in San Francisco, you're gonna kill yourself because you got more important things to do. Why do you give all these people access? You have to give people access. There are people in marginalized communities that have never had access to people in powerful positions like mine. And when you talk about building relationships, I can just speak from my personal experience, that goes a long way. And it's internal as well, having access to the chief of police, having access to the commanders and the command staff, real access, not, you know, when I say real access, make yourself available. Now, you know, I know, you know, going to lineups and going to roll calls, that's one way to do it, but I'm talking about one-on-one access, taking the time to sit down and hear what's on people's minds and address their concerns. Really important to build relationships.
That's a great insight, I think, based in, it's very much tied to what we've seen as well, in just in the world in general. It feels like a heavy investment, but the return on that investment can actually be much bigger than people would imagine. You know, I think you're experiencing that, it sounds like. Jack, I know you wanted to follow on.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, just a quick data question, and then a question from Layla in the chat box asking about the future of policing. So just two quick ones, Chief. There are mandatory data reports that our agency and others around the country are obviously required to provide: stops, force, shootings, demographics, etc. And in our organization, gratefully, stop and force numbers are trending down. But while data is important, those numbers are a bit two-dimensional because they do not talk about the quality of those interactions. And so after 2014 in Ferguson, we entered the police legitimacy and procedural justice era, where Mears and Tyler's work said we need to move beyond whether an interaction was within policy and lawful, and even whether what we do is effective, to was it right? You know, this qualitative versus quantitative analysis. But where are we in 2020? You know, I mean, is the future of policing less interactions, or is it about more rightful interactions that are grounded in procedural justice and legitimacy, or is it some combination of both?
Jack, I think it's a combination of both, and you bring an outstanding point, and this is part of the complexity of where we, in my opinion, where we need to go moving forward. Let's talk about procedural justice as it relates to all the data that you're talking about. These numbers and these charts and these graphs are all connected to human beings, first and foremost. And so the first thing we have to do is step back, and I think intellectually we all do get it, that these are human beings that we talk about, but sometimes you kind of lose track of that. So use of force, and when we talk about procedural justice and use of force, you know, I say the vast majority of the people that we use force on, by and large, are arrested. And, you know, the part about procedural justice and allowing people to have a voice and you know, voice, that's one of the tenets, right? It's really hard to do in that setting because you've arrested an individual you just used force on. So even if you wanted to have that, allow that person to have a voice, what happens? We have a criminal investigation. We have to Mirandize, which is the right and the legal thing to do. Can we even have a discussion with that person at that time about, hey, let's talk about how this happened. Let's talk about what we did. Let's talk about, you know, what you feel about it. What did we do wrong? You can't have those discussions in most settings. So we have this segment of population that we use force on. When they get followed up with, it's usually with the IA investigation, the IA interview. Now that is a format for them to have that voice, but by then it's already adversarial. So inherently, this is a complexity that, in my opinion, it really makes it hard in the world of use of force to really implement the true spirit of procedural justice. Maybe there's something we could do after the fact when all the investigations are done. I don't know, but I don't think we're there yet. I don't know any department that has a follow-up loop other than our OIS, you know, where we follow up with the family, where you go back and, you know, after you use force on an individual, kind of debrief. Hey, how can we do this better? You know, maybe that's the next step, the future. But when we talk about procedural justice in that realm, it's really hard to achieve all the different tenets of procedural justice in that realm because of legal restrictions, because of administrative restrictions and the like. So I think one of the things that, you know, to the point in the question about the data and, you know, quantitative versus qualitative, our policy, Jack, you're well aware of this because you weighed in on it. You know, we are changing our use of force policy in San Francisco, and we're actually putting in the policy a paragraph about safeguarding dignity. You know, when you have to knock a person down, when it's appropriate to do that, and you have to force a person to the ground and prone them out and the like, let's pick them up immediately and dust them off and treat them with dignity. We wrote that into our policy. that's a huge step, in my opinion, in the right direction. Because look, here's the reality. I was an FTO, Jack, you were an FTO. All the people that I respected on LAPD, that taught me how to do police work, they had one thing in common. And this was what they would tell me. And they told me this to a person. Do your job, do it right. Sometimes you got to dust people off and make sure that they understand that you know that they're human beings and you're going to treat them with dignity and respect. I don't care if they just murdered somebody. That stuck with me from the day from my first FTO who told me that to today. I don't care what the crime is. I don't care what we walk into some horrible situations, but when you talk about the qualitative piece of use of force, if we have to use force, hey, that's a part of policing. It always will be, it always has been. We can do a better job on the dignity part,
Right.
the quality of that interaction.
You're right. I maybe you know, Tracy Mears and Tom Tyler's work didn't go far enough. Yeah, rightful policing is great, but inclusive policing is sort of where we're at in 2020.
Right.
We need to be inclusive. We need to preserve dignity and really bring alive that safety with respect. So thank you for that, Chief.
Right.
One last question, and it's more of a general question, but from Nila in the chat box, who had asked things that are going on. New legislation has been passed in Berkeley and in other cities around the country, talking about either defunding or reprioritizing, or even maybe not even pulling cars over anymore. With your crystal ball, and maybe it's not even needed, maybe just with the hard and the soft trends of being able to predict what future looks like, what does the future of policing look like from your eyes?
I believe the future of policing, and I'm going to go to the immediate future. I think we're going to have, it's going to be a test tube. It's going to be an experiment. I think you're going to see people willing to take what might sound like kooky ideas right now, just like the Wright brothers' idea was kooky when they thought they can fly a machine. You know, Edison's ideas were kooky, and now we all flip on a light switch. I think we're going to have people willing to take risks and have that type of experimentation in policing to see if we can change things for the better. And look, for one, I welcome that. And I think we have to be really careful. Our culture, you know, it's a tough culture, policing. We have a tough culture. And we look at things like what's being done in Berkeley, and oh, that would never work. You know, Nelson Mandela, things seem impossible until they're done, right? We need to be open right now. So number one, the immediate future is let's have an open mind about things that even if they sound goofy to us, let's have an open mind about giving it a true chance to succeed, because that's how this country has become the great country it is. Kooky ideas, and now, you know, like I said, we're flipping on light switches and we're flying, you know, 300 people on airplanes and doing things that we never would have thought imaginable. Policing is going to be that way as well. Yeah, I think you're going to see, oh, I'm sorry, just to close this out.
Wonderful.
I think we're going to see, and it might not happen in our careers, Jack, but I do think you're going to see a restructuring of what is it that we need police for, as opposed to other people doing this work. I think that is going to be a reality, and a welcome reality in my point of view. And I don't think it's going to take as long as people imagine, because right now the energy behind the calls for change, and it's not a bad thing for us, because look, I don't have a social science degree. I don't have a psychology degree or psychiatry, you know, MD behind my name. The reality is there are people better suited than me and you to do that work. But we get the calls because when it's emergency, and I grew up with a sister with mental illness. I know what it feels like to have to dial 911 when things are out of control. You don't know who else to call. Yep. I've lived that. You know, and when that officer comes to your house, and when it's done right and they quiet things down, that officer is a hero. And I'm telling you from the eyes of a 12-year-old until, you know, she passed away 13 years ago, 9 years ago, I'm sorry. We live with that, you know, and when that officer came to our house and took care of things in a dignified way, we were very, very grateful and thankful. Would I have preferred now in my, you know, 50-something-year-old years of wisdom to call a mental health professional to resolve those issues? Yeah, I would have preferred. Well, now I can say that. But when things are getting trashed in the house and things are out of control, I'm not thinking about calling a doctor. Let's call the police. And so that's where we are in our society. But I do think that shift is coming, where we will have the infrastructure to have and we're doing it a little bit in San Francisco, but not enough of it. And I know other cities are doing it as well. But I think this is going to be our future. And I think that's going to take some of the burden off of policing and hopefully give us more time to actually build relationships and get the real bad guys off the streets and do the things that me and you and everybody on this call came on for.
I love it. You've heard it here first. Chief Scott has made a call for all provocateurs and disruptors to come into this profession to provoke thought and to disrupt the mediocrity and the status quo that we are in. If it could work for Silicon Valley, it should work for us inside of policing. So thank you, Chief, for that answer. Michael and Robert, how about some closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, so for me, you struck me with the word dosing when you were talking about South LA and about the right dosage. And it connected up to me the themes that run throughout your talk today were really about sort of like trauma and healing. And so from Birmingham to Rodney King to these different issues and how we can learn from them. And it kind of opened my mind to think about the police officer as shaman, as a potential agent for healing. When done right, and when done with this compassion, like you said, when we dust people off and give them and restore their dignity, we start that process of healing. So thank you so much for these insightful comments and great leadership courage that you've shown.
Thank you, Robert. And I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
And for me, Chief, I'm so grateful that you shared your journey with us, because right now I'm thinking of one of the words that we really talk a lot about in Blue Courage, and that is that leadership in the 21st century requires us to live in a world of what's possible, not what has been, but what is possible. And you challenge us to have open minds. From this discussion, I'm left with the clear certainty of how uncertain policing is right now, and how complex policing in the 21st century is. And along with that, I'm also struck by how our journey, our career is informed by so many things, the different police leaders that influenced you in different ways, that have brought you to this moment. All of us have had a journey with different people, with different experiences, with different interactions, and they've all informed who we are right now. And I think to be reflective of that journey and what we take away from some of those key experiences, and recognize that that has shaped who we are right now and how we react to the moments we find ourselves in, is perhaps an awakening that we all need. I'm grateful for you very much that you're one of the influential police leaders in our profession in this moment of challenge. So thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Michael. And you know what? I appreciate your work. And I told you this, and I tell you this all the time. It's these type of training seminars that we are able to share these experiences. And I hope somebody on this session will remember some of this, even if it's just a little piece, and will influence me like the people that I've mentioned have influenced them, like the people that I've mentioned influenced me. And that's all we can ask for.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chief. Thank you so much, panelists. Back to you, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us, and to Jack too for sharing your chief with us today. Everyone did a wonderful job. This is a brilliant session. Thank you to everyone who participated in today and who asked questions. Please, we encourage you, go to info@growbluecourage.com, share more of your questions with us. We're happy to answer them when they come through. And go to the website, www.growblueculture.com, to get more information about our panelists for next week. We're very excited. Next Wednesday, July 22nd, we're going to have Dr. Jerry Radcliffe with us. He's an evidence professor at Temple University. We will be exploring how evidence-based practices can be utilized to shift an evidence-based culture. So this is a really exciting episode for us next Wednesday. Please do not forget to register, and everyone have a wonderful weekend, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.